Rosita, Colorado, was known to be a peaceful hamlet over a century ago. But what made this peaceful hamlet different was that at night, no one ever stepped out. When purple shadows darkened the green hills of Custer County, a ghost once walked. The town dogs would howl from the hilltops and the residents dare not move about. No one knew for sure who the ghost was, but some said it was that of an old soldier named Colonel Graham B, who began his nightly prowls shortly after silver and gold were discovered. You see, the route the colonel made never varied, it always stayed the same. He marched back and forth across the bridge that by day carried nothing spookier than a bouncing buckboard. But marching wasn't the only thing this specter would do. A witness had returned home late one night after being chased by the specter for 4 miles. He claimed he saw the colonel swinging, hand over hand from a girder to girder on the underside of the bridge. The witness went on to say that the colonel's eyes looked like hot coals burning. Now, I bet you're wondering if the colonel was a real person, and the answer is yes. Colonel Graham was real, but he was known as a mine jumper, and with him he had 2 accomplices, and together they did Rosita, Colorado dirty. They caused a skirmish that became known as the bloodiest one in the history of Rosita. A band of German prospectors discovered a mine, so rich with gold and silver that was within a short distance of Rosita and the small village. They ended up naming the mine Pocahontas, which they said was in honor of the Native American princess, when it wasn't an honor, but a disgrace. Before work could even begin, news of the mine had begun to spread. Within days and weeks, greedy fortune seekers came from all over the country, and just like that, hotels, stores and saloons popped up, but couldn't keep up with the needs of immigrants who flood the streets and sidewalks. Other needs were met by saloon owners who wanted the extra income and opened the first floor rooms to women who pledged the mine workers after a long day at work or felt the need to cheat on their wives. In just 3 months, Rosita grew from maybe 50 scattered homes to well over 1,000 or more persons. The town became as a every man for him or herself town, and violence became popular because news got out every other night of a stabbing, choking, poisoning or a gunshot by a person who couldn't have enough of gold or silver. But back to the trio. They were considered bold and daring knaves. Among them were W.A. Stewart, A. Colonel Boyd and A. Colonel Graham, who a man claimed to be as mild as a man can be, a man who would never scuttle a ship or cut a throat. Neither of the soldiers' first name is known. Oddly enough, the villagers found these men to be very affable men, and came to respect. Stewart and Boyd, who considered themselves to be capitalists, opened a small bank, while Graham opened a gin mill. By now, it must have been known that the man known as Stewart wasn't named Stewart at all. It was one of many aliases that he used. You see, this man was in a gang, and once his gang, but not himself, were arrested, he became a coward and fled west to Denver. He was going to lie low when news got out about the discovery of the Pocahontas mines. From that point he vanished from Denver and showed up in Rosita. It was here that he met Graham and Boyd. Boyd, whose army association was dubious, had once been mayor of Baxter Springs, Arkansas, and was a proprietor of faro banks and other den of infamy. It is said that one night, Boyd became enraged by 2 men and killed them. He disguised himself and fled to the west. He had no money, but Stewart did, so they operated the bank together. At Hugo, on the Kansas Pacific Railroad, shot and robbed the paymaster, then hightailed it to Denver. The 3 had gotten together and planned on running away with the gold and silver, which was worth $500,000 in those days, decided it was best to get swaggered by drinking whiskey, did shifts by marching back and forth, day and night in front of the entrance to the mine, threatening anyone and everyone who dared to approach them with an argument. The sheriff was powerless and literally had to beg the governor to send more troops, and with that, before they troops showed up, 3 men were dead. Graham saw them as trouble and shot all 3, screaming, "My work is done. The devil shall pay me with women and whiskey for the rest of my days," before running into the mine to hide for several days. The men of Rosita decided to form an army of their own, and headed toward the mine to take it back, but before they could take another foot, Grandma emerged with a gun in each hand and started shoot every which way he could think of. The small group of citizens ran for cover in the hills. As Graham was crossing the bridge, shots rang out into the night, and Graham dropped dead on the spot. Boyd and Stewart had already ran, but Boyd didn't get far. He was caught in Cannon City and returned to Rosita with his hanging set for the next day at noontime. But karma had other plans for Boyd. He was granted a stay of execution, but the infamous James boys decided that they were gonna kill him for treachery. Either way, Boyd still got the last laugh. The bank vault was emptied out by none other than Stewart. Stewart had safely reached New York, where years later, a detective who was following the thug for 10 years, saw him on the streets, arrested him and had him tried for robberies that resulted in life imprisonment at Sing Sing, where he made boots until he presumably died there. Graham was left at the spot where he was felled. His body was soon disposed, but his ghost remained for decades, screaming invectives against his murders. Rosita was abandoned after that. It stayed that way until Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer bought the land and town for their movies. It also gained a lot of new residents as well. Colonel Graham, presumably, won't bother the new residents unless they disturb his fitful slumber.